Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Trump administration cuts to health care programs have hit San Diego County. Thanks for joining us. I'm John Carroll in for Maya Trabulsi. About $40 million in funding to San Diego has been revoked. KPBS reporter Thomas Fudge tells us that could make it much harder to pay for a public health lab that's nearing completion.
The federal grants that have been rescinded were going to come from the Centers for Disease Control, and they were going to help pay for this $93 million health center under construction in Kearny Mesa. County officials say the CDC grants were for things like laboratory capacity and vaccines for children. County Supervisor Tara Lawson-Remer says she thinks the Trump revocations are meant to undermine the CDC and give the impression that government doesn't work.
I think we're at a moment where we really have to acknowledge that the administration's not looking out for us. They're not looking out for regular people, not looking out for everyday Americans.
County staff say the local services that could be affected include administration of flu, COVID, and hepatitis A vaccinations. They also say lack of funding will hamper investigations of infections in long-term care facilities.
We test for infectious disease, things like measles, mumps, norovirus, to identify a potential outbreak and then mitigate that outbreak. Diagnostic testing is one of the first lines of defense in combating an outbreak.
The health services funding cuts from the Trump White House may not occur. California and more than 20 other states have sued to stop them, and for now, it looks like they have. The California Attorney General's office says a Rhode Island judge has granted them a temporary restraining order, but Lawson-Remer points out that Trump has been known to disregard court orders.
I think we're hopeful that this administration will actually respect the Constitution and obey the rule of law, but the track record's not good.
The CDC has not returned calls for comment. Thomas Fudge, KPBS News.
A nationwide day of protests are planned tomorrow against President Donald Trump, his administration, and Elon Musk. KPBS reporter Jacob Ayer looks at what kind of local action may be in store.
From sidewalks to city halls, people all over the U.S. are once again expected to take part in mass protests this Saturday. Their collective message is hands off.
We never had too much reason to march around before 2016.
88-year-old Ann Wemple and her 95-year-old husband Don are lifetime San Diegans and longtime KPBS volunteers. They plan to take to the streets downtown and make their voices heard.
People who are opposed to the current plan of things, and the only way to do it is to march. It's people power, and I think it works.
And some who aren't able to march have another plan to show their dissatisfaction with the current federal administration.
People here just felt the need to get out and do something.
87-year-old Judy Souter, 84-year-old Ian Volner, and 105-year-old Alice Yee are residents at the Casa de Mañana retirement community, which is a supporter of KPBS. They plan to host a demonstration at their complex with dozens of residents taking part.
We are not going back. And the man in the White House is determined to attack the very programs that we have worked so hard to put in place.
Political science professor Carl Luna says we've seen these types of protests before.
You had the Women's March, which started big and then fizzled because of internal debate about what they were really arguing about. The Black Lives Matter movement got a lot of national attention, but ultimately did not change a lot of policy.
Luna says they need a clear, unifying message.
My optimism for protest movements in general is that they make the people in power have to pay attention and can mitigate behavior of the public's turning against them.
The Casa de Mañana residents say they have one top concern: protect what they see as threats to democracy amidst rising political divisions.
I'm asking Congress, I said, we elected you to protect democracy, and that's what you should be doing. That's what I'm going to have on my sign.
I don't remember in my lifetime ever having democracy so much challenged as it is right now.
The April 5th protests are being led and funded by a wide range of progressive advocacy groups. So far, several protests are planned in San Diego County, with the largest one at the Civic Center. Jacob Ayer, KPBS News.
The cool, damp pattern is working to slide its way on east, and as we get rid of it, we're going to be talking drier weather coming as we head into the weekend and a warm up ahead. I'll have all those details and the full forecast still coming up.
Today, Democratic members of Congress took a trip to the southern border to see Trump administration policies at work firsthand. San Diego Representative Sarah Jacobs joined members of the House Homeland Security Committee on the visit, which included tours of Homeland Security facilities. Jacobs spoke with our media partner KGTV at the San Isidro port of entry.
We just want to make sure they know that we're watching, and we're making sure that our constituents, regardless of their immigration status, are having their constitutional rights protected.
Republicans hold an 18-14 majority on the House Homeland Security Committee. Congresswoman Jacobs is not on that committee. However, she says she hopes lawmakers will focus on immigration reform and finding easier routes to citizenship. The Trump administration last month cut funding to legal aid organizations that represent unaccompanied migrant children in deportation hearings. KPBS reporter Gustavo Solis says the organizations are now suing to restore the funding.
The Trump administration's cuts to legal aid for unaccompanied minors would have far-reaching impacts.
We represent over 160 children below the age of 6 under this funding.
Mickey Donovan-Kalous is Director of Legal Services for the Immigrant Defenders Law Center. She says that without lawyers, those children would have to represent themselves in court.
It's simply not possible for children that age to try to navigate the system alone. It makes a mockery of the idea of due process.
Donovan-Kalous says that these cuts could impact 26,000 children who are facing deportation nationwide. They include extremely vulnerable cases.
We work with child victims of forced labor and sexual trafficking in their home countries, children who have faced death threats, persecution because of their LGBT identity, victims of child abuse.
Legal aid organizations impacted by the cuts are now suing the Trump administration. They argue that the federal government has a legal responsibility to ensure that unaccompanied children have legal representation. A federal judge issued a temporary restraining order requiring the government to restore funding while the lawsuit plays out. Donovan-Kalous called it a legal victory, but as of Friday, the funding still had not been released.
We still are in a holding pattern. We don't know when funding will be restored at this point. So we're still in limbo. It's still chaos.
Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.
California law says cities have to build more housing or face consequences. But one North County city is planning to push back in order to get local control over their land use. KPBS North County reporter Tanya Thorne is here now to tell us more. Tanya, what city and what's going on?
Well, John, Encinitas is the city that we're talking about here, and they recently passed a development that they really didn't want to approve, and it was opposed by the council and the community. And they did that because it was either approve this project or face the consequences. On both ends of Quail Gardens Drive in Encinitas, you will find construction crews, jackhammers, and bobcats busy at work. 3 housing developments are approved and underway off the 2-lane road, and the city council recently approved one more. Quail Meadows, a 448-unit development which includes 90 affordable units. But they didn't want to approve it.
Here's Encinitas Mayor Bruce Ehlers.
We are approving this project under duress and only because the credible threats made by HCD and the state leave us no choice.
HCD is the California Department of Housing and Community Development. They sent the city a letter warning what could happen if the project was denied. Encinitas would lose its compliant housing element. That could lead to violations, fines, and lawsuits from the state. But it also triggers something else.
But that step that would occur where we get decertified is fatal and catastrophic across the board in Encinitas. We're such a lucrative market. We would have developers putting in builders' remedies. Multiple developers would put in builders' remedies and get maximum whatever they could get out of it, because we're such an attractive market.
Builders' remedies allow developers to bypass zoning rules and restrictions in order for the city to meet its housing goals. So despite large opposition from the community and the city council, Encinitas was forced to approve the Quail Meadows project.
We need to fight it. I will fight. I'll close with my favorite quote, which is Henry Ford, and it's whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And so if you give up and don't fight, you've lost. We would lose. And I felt that's the way the previous administrations had been doing. They said, oh, we can't fight the state. On the other hand, I will fight. I'm committed to fighting the state to maintain our local control and protect our paradise here in Encinitas.
Okay, that's interesting. So how does he plan on challenging it when other challenges in the past have not been successful?
You know, John, we were just talking about Coronado and Huntington Beach, and these are cities that have already tried to take on the state, right, and challenge these housing laws, but oftentimes they're doing it alone. And so what Mayor Ehlers told me was that he really wants to join other cities and coalitions that are already in place to challenge the state. And so he did tell me that a lot of Northern California cities are already doing this, and he wants to get San Diego cities to join them and challenge the state on these housing laws, because like we saw with this project, I mean, it was one that the community and the council was very much against. And so he mentioned to me that there's already a lot of nearby local San Diego cities that want to join this challenge and join him and the Northern California cities to challenge the state on these housing laws. And he also told me that he wants the community to speak to their elected officials, right? If they are not happy with these developments and these state mandated housing laws, he wants them to let their elected officials know, and hopefully they will be advocating for them.
Speaking of projects, what about the one you were talking about in there, the Quail Meadows project?
Yeah, so that is a project that council approved, but builders still don't have the green light to go ahead and build. This now moves on to the Coastal Commission, and we know that can be a lengthy process. And that is already being appealed by 3 different groups opposing it, and they're citing, you know, a lot of environmental issues. So that still has a way to go before we know whether or not there's going to be a shovel hitting the ground. But here, I mean, this project I think is what really motivated Encinitas to challenge the state, because it was one that was largely opposed by the community and by the majority of the council. So I think this project did it, and we will be seeing Encinitas possibly riling up San Diego cities to join other Northern California cities and other cities to challenge the state. So we could be seeing a change here.
Yeah, interesting. Being a member of the North County Bureau, I know you'll keep your eye on it.
I definitely will.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thanks.
I'm Jeff Bennett. Tonight on the NewsHour, China hits back with tariffs matching the ones imposed by the U.S. That's at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
The losses continued on Wall Street today after China matched President Trump's big raise of tariffs. The S&P 500 plummeted 6%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 2,231 points, and the NASDAQ Composite dropped 5.8%. Like many other businesses across the country, a Northern California restaurant owner is bracing for the tariffs' impact on prices. Andrea Nicano reports from the Bay Area.
Lotus Cuisine in San Rafael opened almost 30 years ago. Surinder Saroa, known as Paul by many of his customers, was born in India and grew up in the grocery and spice business. He was craving a taste of home, something he couldn't find in Marin County.
From there, I got to have a food at Indian restaurant, and I did not have a good experience. And I told my wife, Linda, I'm going to open a restaurant.
Since then, the Lotus brand of restaurants and market have been a huge success, but running a restaurant has come with its challenges. He says business in March was down 20% compared to last year. Now he's worried about how the tariffs will impact his bottom line.
We just bought the coconut oil today. It's already used to $50. Today it's $59. So it's already 20% is up. So God knows tomorrow what it's going to be when we shop.
Saroa says a lot of the ingredients used in his dishes come from India, which was hit with a 25% tariff, and Thailand, which is expecting a 36% tariff.
He's cooking the chicken coconut curry. All of these spices for our ingredients, for our cooking, has to come from that part of the world. And that's makes the difference of cuisine. Otherwise, it's not the same cuisine.
Saroa has been preparing for the possibility of these tariffs for a while.
Just getting more inventory because we don't know what the inventory is going to be. It's going to run out or not, so we just being prepared.
He says he's not planning to make any price changes on the menu yet, saying it's the last thing he wants to do.
I think right now we are absorbing the costs, but I think if it's going to continue, we don't make money, then we actually have to pass it on to the customer. I mean, in the end, the customer has to pay.
Here in San Diego, small business owners from clothing stores to wineries are worried about what new across-the-board tariffs could mean for their business. At a bike shop in La Mesa, they're already seeing changes that could have a lasting impact on their overall sales.
Being that our industry is mainly, overseas, that everything affects the prices of our bikes, like fuel prices, and of course tariffs are going to affect that also. We've already had some bike lines that were canceled. GT is one of them. All their bikes that were being ordered, they were all canceled.
Economists are growing concerned that the escalating trade war could cause a recession. The head of the Federal Reserve also warned tariffs can push up inflation. TikTok will remain on U.S. devices for now. A law requiring TikTok to be sold to a U.S. company or else be banned was set to take effect tomorrow. But President Trump delayed enforcement of the ban for 75 days while his staff works on a deal. Amy Kiley has more on the negotiations.
It'll come out before the deadline.
The White House says it's working on a deal to keep TikTok in U.S. app stores. A bipartisan law is set to ban it over national security concerns, unless its Chinese parent company ByteDance sells it.
You want to make sure that the TikTok app in the United States is not spying on people. Right. It's good for national security. You also want to give people access to this incredible platform.
Under the U.S. law, ByteDance must sell at least 80% ownership. China seems reluctant to allow that. President Donald Trump is floating the idea of using tariffs as leverage.
It doesn't matter how many investors want to buy this U.S. app of TikTok. Does China want to let them buy it is the big question. They have indicated that they don't.
A deal also must meet two other requirements. The first is TikTok and ByteDance can't coordinate on data sharing due to privacy concerns. Analysts say that could be doable since the U.S. company Oracle now stores that information. The second is ByteDance can't control TikTok's algorithm for fear China could use it to influence Americans. That's a sticking point that Trump once proposed addressing with a lease agreement.
If you're licensing the algorithm, I don't personally understand how you're solving for that problem, but I'm sure that's something that the U.S. government is talking about with this deal.
I'm Amy Kiley reporting.
The county of San Diego is warning that dangerous levels of domoic acid have been detected in locally harvested mussels. County officials are advising people not to eat locally harvested mussels, clams, scallops, or oysters that were not purchased from a state-certified commercial shellfish harvester or dealer. The warnings do not apply to shellfish sold at local markets or restaurants because they are subject to frequent mandatory state testing to monitor for toxins. The California Department of Public Health will continue local sampling to determine when sport-harvested shellfish is safe to eat again. The San Diego Botanic Garden in Encinitas is leading an effort to make plants into better medicines. KPBS Sci-Tech reporter Thomas Fudge tells us what we already know about herbal medicines and what scientists hope to learn.
Ephedra, cannabis, artemisia, opium poppies. A lot of well-known drugs start with roots in the ground. This greenhouse at the San Diego Botanic Garden contains a lot of them, and it's the heart of the Medicinal Plants Initiative. Ben Naiman with the Botanic Garden says the initiative is a partnership between plants, scholarship, and the pharmaceutical industry.
Here in San Diego County, we would have everything needed to go from a medicinal plant that's out in the environment, study them for their chemistry, their biology, their genetics, and actually translate those through the pharmaceutical pipeline into botanical drug products or Western medicines.
The Medicinal Plants Initiative is the 3-year-old creation of the Botanic Garden. Naiman says they have quadrupled their medicinal plant collection, now with 2,300 of them. Offering one example, Naiman said Native Americans in California used yerba santa for respiratory disorders like asthma and bronchitis.
And the reason it's even called yerba santa, that's a Spanish name, is that when the Spaniards came over, they were introduced to this plant by the native people, and they found that it was more effective at treating tuberculosis than any drug they had brought from Europe.
One of the goals of the Medicinal Plants Initiative is to understand plants genetically, and that's where Todd Michael comes in. He's a genetic researcher at the Salk Institute and a partner in the project. He says the challenge is identifying genetic pathways that give a plant its curative chemicals.
We can say, yes, this plant has the genes that make this chemical.
Michael says for now, that kind of discovery is the object of the plant's initiative.
However, once we know that a specific plant makes something, we could in the future do some hybridization of plants to get new species that either grow well here or grow well in other conditions.
One plant here in the greenhouse that's well known for its medicinal qualities is one that you will find growing in San Diego County, ephedra. The source of ephedrine, it's a stimulant that's used for several ailments. Surgeons use it to prevent low blood pressure during anesthesia. Michael says even some plants we may consider native and wild have been influenced by the human hand. He says people have been breeding cannabis for at least 10,000 years.
And so we have definitely co-evolved with medicinal plants so that they make things that make us happy, so we continue to grow them.
Other plants, Michael says, have developed their medicinal powers to prevent animals from eating them. He says maybe some critters that ate the stimulant ephedra ended up feeling tense and hyper.
Or now they know, don't eat that plant, it will make you crazy.
Thomas Fudge, KPBS News.
We've gotten some rounds of showers, even a bit of mountain snow recently. This week, as it comes to an end, we're going to put a lot of that behind us, especially heading into the weekend and really into next week, where we won't be talking about much in the way of moisture. So drying out is our story here as we go into the weekend. Also warming up a little bit. A lot of those numbers headed up not only for the weekend, but really into next week, the middle and later part of the next week area for areas like the desert communities. It is going to be getting on a hot pattern as we work our way through this April week. Notice San Diego County, as we look around the region here tonight, not really all that active. In fact, we'll be clearing out. 49 the low for the city as you head towards Oceanside, 41, and Ramona coming in at 38, Mount Laguna 34 for your low. As we transition through your Saturday, all that moisture again departing here, so we are keeping things drier, quieter as the ridge kind of rebuilds just in time for Saturday and Sunday, which means it's some pretty nice weather for us. 69 degrees as we look around the city. Chula Vista coming in at 70 degrees, Campo 65 for you, and Borrego Springs topping out at 83. However, the numbers will be rising the days to come for some of those desert communities. The coastal communities, though, really not too bad. We do make it to the mid 70s on Sunday. There's a little bit more of a coastal onshore push for us on Monday, which is why those numbers drop off a bit, but even that's not all that cold. Same thing for the valley communities and inland communities here. We're looking at temperatures climbing to the 80s on Sunday, then falling back into the mid 70s on Monday and Tuesday. But again, not really all that cold. We'll start to climb again for the middle and later part of the week. Mountain communities, very bright time here as we make it into the 50s, and that'll push our numbers back into the upper 50s, close to 60 on Tuesday. Wednesday, we could be making a run at 70 degrees. If that's not enough, our desert communities, this is where we notice those numbers really going up through the 90s Monday and Tuesday. By Wednesday, we'll be pushing the triple digits, especially into the later part of the upcoming week. For KPBS News, I'm AccuWeather meteorologist Melissa Constanzer.
Join us tonight for Soccer a la Frontera, where we look at soccer's cultural growth in the San Diego, Tijuana region. The series was produced by KPBS reporter Jacob Ayer, who walks us through the 50-year history of soccer in our region, from the streets to stadiums. It airs at 8:30 tonight in place of KPBS News This Week. And we want to remind you to check out a brand new podcast from KPBS. It's called The Finest. The podcast captures the people, art, and movements redefining our region's cultural identity. You can listen to the first episode now wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes will come out on Thursdays. We'll leave you with an out-of-this-world story that hits close to home. 4 space tourists splashed down off the coast of Oceanside this morning after traveling an orbit never attempted before. The mission SpaceX Dragon capsule returned to Earth after the passengers were carried in a unique orbit around Earth. It was the first time humans have passed directly over the North and South Poles. It was also the first West Coast landing in SpaceX's 5-year history of human spaceflight missions. And if you heard a loud bang around 9:15 this morning, that might have been the reason why. SpaceX warned the rocket's re-entry could create a sonic boom. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I'm John Carroll. Have an excellent evening and a wonderful weekend.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit BillHowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.